My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato. That's how the old song goes. It's a story of a couple who have different accents, and presumably those accents represent different worldviews. They playfully suggest that these views are irreconcilable and say, let's call the whole thing off. By the end of the song, though, they realize that calling the whole thing off means they'll have to part, resulting in heartbreak. So they agree to accept their differences in the name of love. What happens in real life, meaning occupational safety or organizational culture, when the difference is not just accents, but words? Do different words represent different worldviews? And if they do, does it really matter? That's what we're discussing today. Our guest, Crista Vesel, is a safety communication specialist whose focus on the language of learning has helped government agencies and private companies around the world value their people during normal work and after incidents. Her research on the importance of language in workplace safety adds academic and practical knowledge across industries. She's an adjunct professor for the University of Alabama at Birmingham in the Advanced Safety Engineering and Management Master's Degree Program. There, she helps safety professionals become catalysts for cultural change and learning. Crista is the co-author of the book Human and Organization Potential. Her company, Dynamic Inquiry, offers courses and coaching in HOP, learning reviews, and language reviews. Crista joins us from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary.
So when did you start looking at language in the context of organizational performance or occupational safety? And why? Can you sort of walk me through how your thinking got to where it is today?
Back in about, maybe around 2009, I was doing some consulting work for the U.S. Forest Service. My husband, Ivan Papalitti, worked for them, and I know you've had him on before, and he's the co-author of the book. He was attending a master's degree program at Lund University in Sweden, and with Sidney Dekker, who is the originator of the New View, which many people have heard of, different way of looking at accidents and incidents and normal work. And so he was bringing that into the Forest Service at the time. I had already had a strong language background. That's where I started in communication. And so I was brought in to help with things like accident investigations, and not little ones, like big fatality ones. And the more dramatic an event is, the worse the language can be, honestly. And we'll talk about that a little later. But so then I was working on some of these projects. And then Sidney Dekker asked me to actually join his master's program, which I did. And that was at Lund University in Sweden, a university that started in 1666. I mean, a really old, established European university. And it was in human factors and system safety. It was really about valuing people and looking at things differently than we had before, really looking at that new view in safety. And what was really interesting to me was that no one had really looked at the language around these accident investigations. They put them out there, honestly, for now 100 years plus. We've kind of had the same language coming through. And it kind of results in not changing what we do. We think we're learning from events, but often we don't. And I believed that language was a big piece of that. And so I was also involved with Ivan in creating the learning review, which was a new way to look at accidents and incidents and normal work, very different than investigation. And this learning review concentrated very specifically on language. And what we noticed was that as we put this out there into the Forest Service at the time, which is a large government organization, very hard to change, talk about a deep culture, very hard to change that. But as we put it out there and we started to change the language around not just accident investigations, but how we were speaking with people, how we were having these dialogues. It wasn't too long before that language was coming back to us, being reflected back, words that people never used. For example, it used to be that their accident investigations, which were abominable, by the way, and blamed the people for their own deaths, did not result in learning and injured a lot of people for a very long time after the accident investigation came out. So they used language like cause. Now, that's something that's common in most organizations. They say, what was the cause? What was the root cause, right? We stopped using the word cause. We struck it from the learning review. We replaced it with influence. And as you'll see, there's a big difference between causes and influences. Cause is like it's a dead end. It stops you from inquiry. Whereas when you start talking about influences of the system, the culture, the people, the work, now we're pulled forward with learning, and it creates this action, this activity, this dynamic nature that helps us all to move toward learning. So that's where we kind of started that, and then much later, well, I worked for many different organizations and help them improve their culture, look at their organizational culture, map their culture, which is a different way of looking at it, right? Imagine a mind map, and you say, "Hey, what are we looking at here?" And then you start going off, and you don't know where you're going, but you take this journey into your culture, and you start asking, "Well, why is that the way it is?" You know? And who can we ask about that? Who else can we bring in to reflect that back? And pretty soon you have a much greater understanding of the goal conflicts that are standing in the way you want work done. These aren't failures of people. These are areas where they are given, as Todd Conklin would say, they're given bad choices. They don't make a bad choice. And then about I don't know, over 5 years ago, I joined the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and now this is what I teach. Professor Puplity and I both teach a course in the program. It's not a course; it's about half the program if people choose that track, which is the HOP track. We call it Human Organization Potential instead of Performance. Intentionally changing that word because performance is something that's kind of pushed on top of people. Potential is, again, that pull.
Okay, so you've just answered one of my questions from later on about the difference between the two, but that's great. In your biography, it says that your company offers learning reviews and language reviews. Can you explain the differences and the interactions between those two activities?
Well, honestly, a learning review always has language review involved in it, but there are some people, companies, organizations that just want us to look at the language in particular and start there. So if we look at culture, I'm going to go to Edgar Schein's model of culture. Edgar Schein was kind of the father of organizational culture. And Edgar Schein came up with an idea of a iceberg poking out of the water. And so you see parts of that, right? You see that iceberg, and then underneath there's other things hidden. Well, Ivan changed that, and then we've changed it even further. Now we have a different model. It's called the buoy model. So we think of a buoy on top of the water. Now you can see that buoy. You can visualize that buoy. You see it, right? That's the artifacts of culture. Those are the things that are easy for us to notice in our culture. People from outside our culture can come in and see them too. That's how obvious they are. And unfortunately, that's where we normally focus on in accident investigation, for example, or we even focus in normal work. We look at the behaviors of workers. Well, behaviors are artifacts. They're not what's underneath. And so from the buoy, we come down on this chain and we say that's the espoused values. Those are the things we say about our culture or we hear about our culture. And then the very base is the anchor of that buoy model. And that is the part tying us to where we are right now. Very hard to move the anchor, but that's where we need to go. We need to question that deeply to see what is underneath. What is really pulling us away from where we want to go? And so a language review looks at language, which is, it's an artifact in a way. It is. There's a lot of artifact in it. But it's also the espoused values. It's what we're saying and hearing about our culture. And it's also, it can be the anchor. That language can anchor us to where we are right now. And if we change it, we may be able to change some other parts of our culture that we'd like to touch. And then the learning review, as I said, it's a different way of looking at accidents and incidents. We look at the network of influences around an event, and that could be a negative event or it could be a positive event. I mean, we encourage our people to go do positive events because it's a great time to practice, right? You don't have the drama around something like somebody dying. So it's a time that you can experiment. And that's a word I hope people add to their vocabulary in their work. Feel free to experiment because it really is an experiment. We don't think it is. But if we move toward it as if it is an experiment and use that metaphor, it frees us up to do so much more and to not feel as judged if things don't go the way we think they should.
I want to talk about a paper that briefly that you published in the American Chemical Society, and the title is Agentive Language in Accident Investigation: Why Language Matters in Learning from Events. So let's start at the beginning. What is agentive language?
This is super important, everybody. So an agent is the doer of an action. You could say the cause of an action, right? And the challenge is sometimes people are agents of action. You know, I can take this pencil and I can drop it, and I'm the agent of the action. But what if it accidentally drops? Like something hits my elbow and it drops. By saying I'm the agent of that action, now I am assumed to be the cause, and we will transfer that forward in our safety work to say, see, she failed to hold that pencil, or, she did this. Well, usually that agency isn't fully present, and yet we treat it like it is. Sadly, lots and lots and lots of companies and organizations are using more of a criminal process for looking at accidents than a learning process. But they will use language that says, oh, we want to learn all we can from this, right? That's the first line. But the rest of the language in there and what they do with it stops them from that learning. So agentive language is when we say something. I'll give you an example. I have some things here because it's always interesting. Here's an accident investigation, causal factors findings. This was from the Kramer fire that happened, I think it was in the 1990s in the Forest Service. And this is what they found as causes. Now, the word cause itself becomes agentive because now we're looking at something, not an interconnection of things. So here we go. Management oversight was inadequate. That's agentive toward management. It says they were inadequate, but that's a hindsight look at something that wasn't known in the moment. As things are emerging in the moment of work, we are still making sense of this complex system that's just evolving. And it's dynamic. You never know where it's going to go. We can't fully predict or control a complex system, and any system with people in it is complex. So that alone is not good language. So then, here we go. There was a failure to comply with policy. All right. Well, failure 2 is it's a hindsight look, but it's very, very agentive. And that failure, when we attribute that to people, that's, again, is locking us in to believing something was simpler than it was. Machines fail. People don't fail. They usually do their best in the moment to make sense of what's emerging, what's happening. So that failure to comply, so now we have an even stronger agentive language here. They didn't comply. See, all they had to do was follow those rules and they would have been safe. And yet, that is very infrequently the case. But that language locks us down. There's another one. There was a failure to recognize and adjust suppression strategy and tactics. All right? Failure 2, just failure. Let's look at this from a language perspective. Well, let's actually expand that a little more. Okay, as people, we have this great need for certainty. And we will do just about anything to gain that certainty. And, you can look back and say, cavemen, they needed to be pretty certain that they were going to get something to eat that day, right? I mean, we could go way back. But in our daily lives, we have this need for certainty and also closure. We want to finish things off. And in our work, we see this constantly. There's a need for certainty that we're going to have safe operations, that we're going to be able to make our quota for the month and survive as a company, right? And those things are in contrast to each other. They pull each other apart. So we can look at something called binary opposition here. When we have a need for certainty, we tend to simplify our language to help us feel better about the world. So we will use terms like right and wrong. Well, there's not really a right and there's not really a wrong. There is judgment. There's someone with the power to decide what's right and wrong, but they don't exist on their own. But we use it all the time. Here in this accident investigation, they use the word failure too. Okay, failure, I believe, is a tremendous binary opposition. Its opposition would be success, right? But we never think about that. We get pulled toward this failure side, and then we don't notice that gray space in between. And that gray space of those two sides that don't really exist, that's where learning can happen. But we stop ourselves from learning because we get drawn to that failure side. And so this accident investigation did not result in positive things. In fact, there are many negative things that came out of it too. But it didn't result in learning. So we have to ask, how can we do things a little differently? We are always pulled toward our need for certainty. We have to recognize when that's happening and say, wait a minute, I have a need for certainty. Our team has a need for certainty. Maybe it's the accident investigation team. How can we actually expand this and learn in the moment, learn from each other? Maybe that accident investigation team is going to watch for each other's biases and help them understand when they're moving toward a more biased side and try to offer some balance. We don't use the word accident or investigation in learning reviews. We might use the word accident, but the problem with accident is that even if it's an accident, in most workplaces, they'll treat it like an on purpose. That's a problem. Because that results in language like this, these causal factors that didn't do anything to help them learn, but did do a whole lot to blame.
So when it comes to worker safety and these kinds of investigations, do you think by and large that organizations are asking the right questions? And if not, why are they not doing that? And what would those questions be?
That's a super question, Mary. Thank you. So, first, I'm going to pull the word right out of there because, again, we don't have right. Right and wrong, binary opposition. If we can all just move away from binary oppositions, we're already going to do better. So, what kind of questions are we asking? Well, sadly, I'll point to one thing. A lot of companies will use accident investigations that focus on something called the Reed technique, which was used for police officers, okay? It's for law enforcement. Now, here's the question. Are safety people, should they be doing criminal acts? Should they be having anything to do with that at all? What do you think, having interviewed so many people?
I think it's dangerous to think of things that way. And it's like you said, there's no space for learning in that. The Reed technique is like an interrogation
It sure
technique, isn't
is.
it?
Yep. Yeah, it's in fact, the suspect's guilt is presumed as they begin. And sadly, that's the way we treat people. And usually it's our safety departments, our safety teams that are doing these, I'll just say, reviews. If there's a belief that there might be criminal problems, maybe that is not for the safety department to follow. Maybe that would be where human or HR gets involved. But we are not there to condemn people or say you did a criminal act. If we find that, then it's time to pass that off. And that's often what happens. What else was there to your question? I think I missed some part of it.
Just are, by and large, organizations asking, I said the right questions. Maybe I meant helpful questions or questions that matter. And if not in part, why do you think that's not happening? And what would you suggest to lead to
Better questions.
more helpful questions
Better
or
questions. How
better
can we ask
questions?
better
Yeah.
questions? That's super
Yeah.
important. And that's what we try to help our students develop, that it's a technique. It's not simple. It's not like you come in and you go, I have these questions written down. They're great questions. Those are going to be great. What it's about is valuing the person in the moment. So if I'm with an interviewee, I'm going to try to see them as a person. And I'm going to try to honor their perspective. Now, when you have different people that have different perspectives around an accident, the usually what happens in a general investigation is that they try to make those different perspectives make sense. So they'll get rid of some parts. They'll try to alter it to form this quick story that they want to tell. And it's not the story of the people. It's the story of the investigators. So we do something very different. We go in, we honor their perspectives, and the questions you ask are a big part of that, as you said. So our questions can't be binary. We can't ask something that they could easily say yes or no to. First of all, it gives us absolutely no information. It just stops the whole process. We want them to be comfortable in the moment and to develop some psychological safety so that they are willing to share their story. Consider it a story instead of this factual narrative or account. All right? Because if we interview 5 people, we're going to get 5 different stories. And that's okay because each of them had a different perspective in that moment. It might be as simple as they were standing in different areas of the room. It might be that they have a different experience with the company. Or one is an expert at what they're doing and one isn't. But you know what? Every one of them can add to this story, and then we can understand it from a fuller perspective. So the questions that are asked, first of all, they need to be open. It is very common that people ask questions that are already loaded from their personal bias. They already know the answer, okay? So we need to not come from a place of knowing. We need to come from a place of true, humble inquiry. And that's hard to do. That takes a lot of practice, and you're not going to be good at it all the time. You're going to come out of some interviews and or some just talking with someone at work, and you're going to go, gosh, I could have done better at that. But keep practicing, keep experimenting. Look for those open-ended questions that allow that person to expand. And it might be as simple as asking, how was your day today? That's a much different question than saying, why did you put your finger in the machine? You know, how was your day today? Uh, that that hey, now we might find out about some other things that are stresses in their life, or social relationships that they have with others that might have been distracting them, or maybe something about, how they're not comfortable working that machine, or the machine has changed or something. I mean, it opens us up. And sometimes it gives us information we never dreamed of getting. Don't think that, you know, there's information that we should have because we need to fit it on a one-page uh, review, or, yeah, I'll go into a couple of these in a second because these are really fun. Safety flashes, you know, a Foursquare. Some people, they're forced to look at things as if it's a one-page event and reduce all the information down. Now, there are some ways we can even handle that to some degree and make it better. Don't think that we're going to get perfect language. We're not, or communication, but we could get better. And if we just move toward that humble inquiry side and ask honest questions that don't presume we know the answer, we are already better. Oh, and there's another one here. Be careful of asking the question why. People center on that a lot. The word why, when asked, especially around an event, can make someone just feel so uncomfortable they will not share. They feel like they have to defend themselves. No matter what they did or what the why was, they may feel like they need to take that defensive posture because of that word. Get rid of why. Ask other questions, like something starting with a what. You know, what what do you think happened? Or is there something we can learn from this? Those are much more powerful open questions than why. So, yeah, get rid of why. That's another little hint.
Okay, I have, it's a little bit of a long quote, but bear with me. This is from the book because I think it's the question that it brings me to addresses some of the things you're talking about. So the quote is this: HOP helps us address the complex and messy human aspects of our work environments where uncertainty exists and full prediction is an illusion. This does not mean that the other interventions do not have a place in our systems of work. Simple mechanical failures will respond well to the type of interventions common in organizational control manuals and instruction, which are investigated with linear causal models. So keeping that in mind, I've seen a lot of dichotomies in the safety professional, in the safety profession's discussions of itself. So traditional versus new view, or command and control versus safety differently. Now, I recognize that those terms have very particular meanings, and I'm not super interested in that. I want to talk about the idea of dichotomies in safety discussions. Do you think that an either or mentality is prevalent in the way the safety profession discusses itself?
I think so. Remember that, as I said, we've had over 100 years of, we'll just call it the traditional or old view, just for sake of giving it a space. And that, in some ways, started with Heinrich's work. Heinrich worked for an insurance company. He did some studies. He found out that a very high percentage of their accidents were caused by people, human error. And now nobody can find his research. No one was ever able to prove that, but it doesn't matter. That has been what we carry with us. And to this day, you will still hear, that 85% of accidents are caused by humans. And that already shuts down a lot because now we're like, well, if the human's the cause, that's what we're going to look for. And sadly, that's what a lot of accident investigation manuals do, including the one the Forest Service used before the learning review called the Serious Accident Investigation Guide. And the very first paragraph says that most accidents are caused by humans. So now that's what you're looking for. So we have that huge legacy that we're trying to overcome. And now in the last 20 years or so, you know, Sidney Decker, David Woods, Eric Holnagel, Todd Conklin, Ivan Pupoliti. I mean, there's people that have been trying to introduce some new language, some new ways of doing things. And so it's becoming kind of a dichotomy. And I'd say it was for a while, but what we're seeing now is not that as much as there is a pull toward, or just say the hop side. Doesn't matter. I'm using a label. Labels limit us and don't tell the whole story. And yet, again, our need for certainty makes us want to use labels. I'm using it just as a label. We're getting pulled towards something else because we need something else. We have a lot of accidents that do involve people. Now, is that human error? Is that an influence of the system? Is that they're not given the tools they need or the information they need or the ability to collaborate with others and sense make in the moment? There's so much going on that is messy. So yes, there's a binary opposition of language in some ways, but we're seeing more companies that actually used to be very, very traditional start to think about moving a little bit in the other way. And they're starting to use some of that language too. And that's exciting because we all need to do that.
Do you think companies, or I suppose, have you seen or know any examples of companies who perhaps have moved in that direction to the exclusion of more traditional safety things? Or are they more nuanced than that, where they sort of reconcile the two?
Actually, there was a interesting article that came out recently about this. And it said, there's actually a bias that's forming that says we can never say, a person made a mistake or did an error. Like, it's almost too much of a pull in that way in some places. So you can swing too much in the other way too, because you need to look at things. I mean, there is still complexity in there. First of all, you always have some simple or complicated elements, some machine elements, some rules and regulations, whatever it is, that need to be looked at maybe through some other lenses as well. And people, sometimes you might have a person in a job and you know what? It's not the job for them. And if they're allowed to make mistakes over and over and over, it's not helping them. It's not helping the agency. You need to look at that too and say, wow, maybe they need a different position. Maybe this isn't right for them. And you have to be willing to look at that and say, something is not working here. Let's figure that out. And the way we do that is we work with people and we say, hey, help us understand this event. Help us learn from this. We're doing a learning review. The idea is to learn. It's not to punish. It's not to blame. And if you can say this, you will not be punished by the agency or the company if you can honestly say that. And if you can't say that too. Be honest with them. You need to develop, we call it a container. So you're meeting with people, you're having a dialogue. Now, dialogue is different than an investigation, is different than actually interviewing. Okay. Interviewing still has that one directional feel to it. A dialogue means through the word. It is a shared space between us. Let's have a dialogue together. Let's see where we can go with this. We don't know where we're going to end up. That's already amazingly more open on the end than most things start. So, inviting them into that space, creating a container that creates psychological safety for them, for us. I mean, there's ways you can do that. For example, if I'm a interviewer, investigator, and I come in with my pages and I'm writing like this, okay, this is an affordance. An affordance is something that allows us to do something. It's something that actually begs us to do something. Okay. This is blocking communication. Blocking communication. This says, I don't value you.
Just for the people who are listening solely, she's what Crista's doing is holding up like a piece of paper or a bunch of paper in front of her face or partially covering her face.
Thank you. Yes, I forgot about that part. Yes. So if we hold a clipboard in front of us, and maybe we're the only ones with that clipboard. Hey, what if we empower the other person too? Or maybe we have more than one person. Maybe we're not just interviewing one person as if they're the guilty party. Maybe we bring in a group of people and we have a real dialogue with them. And we say, hey, I'm going to be writing some notes here. And you might want to write some notes too. Here's a notepad for you and a pencil. Feel free to take any notes that you want, or maybe there's some questions you'd like to ask us. Now that's creating more of a power neutral environment, right? I'm not the one in power anymore. I have empowered you. So thinking about little things like that, it's not just language, it's communication. And what we do to communicate in the moment, in that space, means a lot. What are we going to afford them? What affordances have we brought with us? Are we going to sit in chairs? Are we going to be in a circle? Should we be outside? Is it a beautiful day outside? Hey, maybe we could empower those people. Where would you like to meet today? Where would you be most comfortable having a conversation?
I'm sure that you have encountered people who feel that an examination of language is too abstract and too detached from, saying things like, well, you could talk about language all day, but in the end, if you don't have fall protection, then that's a problem. Are there, I guess, what are the most common misconceptions that you encounter about what you do or about your approach?
Interesting question. Yes. We do come across people that don't think they need to value language. And so we drop back away from that and we start to talk about culture. We start to talk about the things that are influencing them and we ask them questions. We open questions. We want to know more about them because if you have someone that is opposed or blocking something like that, we kind of need to map their influences too. They're also under the influence of these things. Are they what are their fears? Are they afraid that, they're not gonna make money? Are they afraid they're not gonna get a bonus? Are they afraid, and I don't wanna call it all money, it's not. Are they afraid that they're gonna look stupid? How can we create space in that moment for them? Because we're not just talking about interviewing people that were part of an accident. We're talking about interviewing everybody, right? Not and let's take away that word interview. We're engaging. We're having a dialogue with everybody, whether it's leadership or um, managers or safety people. We need to learn about them too. And only then can we move forward with an understanding of what's driving them. and what their fears might be. And then we can start to acknowledge, see, language doesn't seem important to them, but now we've brought it around and shown them how it might actually help.
Let's talk about a big term, safety culture. In the book, I'm really curious about different facets of culture that are sort of discussed as subcultures of safety culture. And this is based on the work of James Reason. So first of all, if someone were to ask you to explain safety culture just writ large, how would you go about that?
Well, honestly, I wouldn't. We believe that, there is a real challenge with how we communicate with each other in general. And that is that we reduce things down to labels. Safety culture is a label, and it really doesn't say much at all. In fact, I'm going to quote David Woods, the cognitive scientist, engineer, great guy. Once Ivan and we took him zip lining in Boise, Idaho. And we're having a great time with David. And David comes out with this great quote, which I wrote down and I use all the time. He said, "Labels can masquerade as explanations." That's what happens all the time. We use a label. We use the label safety. We use the label culture. And then we stick them together and think it means more. If we're in a room of people, we often do this experiment. We say, "Okay, everybody, write down what your definition of safety is." Or what is safety? What is culture? We get all kinds of things, right? And even if they're giving us the dictionary definition, which doesn't help us, it doesn't help us to understand what we really mean by it. So let's take the word safety, which is a nominalization. So a nominalization is a word that should be a verb that we can do something with. And now we take it and we create a noun out of it. And that takes all the power away. In fact, Helen Sword has a great little dynamic video on this about nominalizations as little zombies. Like they're sucking away all the power out of words. Well, safety has had that happen. Safety does not mean the same thing to you as it does to me in this moment, next week, in this environment, in that environment. We need to activate it again. So the best thing you can do is to ask people, "Hey, how could we be safe today? How can we empower and make safety dynamic and actually do something with it? What does that mean today in this work?" Right? Safety culture doesn't mean anything. It's just culture. Culture has all sorts of things involved in it that we could map out forever. And there are things that we could say, yeah, that's part of safety. But depending who you ask, it may or may not be in that area. So we don't really like the idea of safety culture just because it simplifies something that is much more complex. And by simplifying it, we're taking away a lot of the power.
Okay, so I'm going to continue with labels, these labels for the subculture, because I think that they are labels, they talk about different facets of culture. And and we don't have to go through each one, but they're informed culture, reporting culture, just culture, flexible culture, and learning culture. So how do they play into an understanding of an organization's culture?
When we put those in the book, this is more Ivan's realm, so I would have him answer this for you more than me. But I would say that when we want people to realize there are many different areas of culture. Honestly, what Reason wrote about it was kind of bounded. It wasn't as open and dynamic as it could be. And so Ivan went in and actually made it a little more dynamic. What we focus on more is learning culture. That's the main piece. All those other pieces are part of that, right? You want a sharing culture even. You want people to speak up. We say, "Hey, see something, say something." Well, there's a label. Why aren't they? What have we created in our culture that blocks them from wanting to do that or being able to do that? Do you have a zero clock that's ticking up on the wall and nobody wants to change that clock because, okay, the organization might say, "Oh, don't worry. We're not going to punish you." That accountability goes much deeper than that. What about your peers? How are they going to feel? Does it mean we're not going to get bonuses? What does this mean for us if we stop that clock? Do we even know? It's just a frightening thing to do. So, moving toward learning in general, and I'm going to talk about language real quick, we need to develop a language that helps us move toward learning. And what that entails is that we stop coming from a position of knowing, being the knower, and actually move to that place of inquiry. In that space, we can learn so much. And that's where we start to draw from people's stories. That's where we also transform, and then we move together in this dynamic place.
So you may have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it again anyway in case there's something you want to add. What would you say to any listeners who are thinking, okay, this is all great. All these ideas are resonating with me, but how do I even start to practically implement a shift in my organization?
First, you start with shifting yourself. Start to notice when you're using a binary opposition. You know, success, failure, yes, no, black, white, whatever it is. If you're going to one of those ends, how can you go back to the middle where you can actually learn something? Start to notice if you're in a true place of humble inquiry or if you're coming in already knowing the answer, knowing that information. Because if you're in that space, you can't learn anything. Start to recognize that so many of the words we use are either labels or metaphors. We also use metaphors because we don't have the time, energy, or maybe ability to describe everything we mean. So we liken it to something else and we hope everybody also thinks the same thing, right? It's another way of labeling, but you can't assume other people see the world the same way we do. Kenneth Gergen, tremendous professor that Ivan and I have worked with a lot. He has a great book on Introduction to Social Construction. That is a great book. You should get that book. He says in there, words create worlds. And you started this whole thing today with almost those words. Words create worlds. They do. So what kind of world are we trying to create? Is it one that's open and learning and full of inquiry, or is it one that we're shutting down? And we all shut down all the time from our nature. We want that certainty. We don't have time, right? Well, at least in some areas of your life or your work, start to change that. Start to question some of the labels. Invite others. Hey, you know, w- we're talking about risk here. We're thinking we're going to reduce that to a number today. Well, what do we really mean by risk? What do you see as risk in this environment today? How could that change? What should we do if that happens? How can I help alert you if I see something that is dumb or dangerous or different? How can we move forward with our language to open us up more instead of shutting us down more?
So you have a hand in training the next generation of safety professionals. Looking at people coming into programs, where do you think the focus in training should be? And another way to ask that is, are there any areas where you feel there's a lack of focus? There's just not enough emphasis on what people are learning as they're training.
So first, I question the word training because training has a connotation. No, no.
I knew you
So
were going to pick up on that.
but see,
That's
this is the
okay.
thing. by using your language, you invite me to go into something that maybe other people could learn from. That's what I see it as an opportunity. So training has a feel to it, a connotation that, first of all, you can complete it. You can do a check in the box activity, and then you're done. That's not real learning. And that's not how adults learn. Adults learn because they value something, because they are allowed to help create it and maybe pass it on to others. That's true learning. So, what we see, certainly the people coming through our program who are all adults around the world, every industry you can think of, we're seeing a shift toward wanting to know more about this connection of people. And as soon as they take my crisis leadership course, which is the first one in our program that really invites them into this new dialogue and think about people differently and culture and sense making and acknowledging our need for certainty, all those things. Once they get through that or even part way through it, they're like, wow, my mind is blown. I had no idea. I see the world differently now. I'm seeing the world differently, not just at work, but when I go home and interact with my family, I'm a different person. So the shift can happen fast. And we see people hungry for that because they see it working. Um, a lot of the traditional safety activities, they haven't really helped improve accident rates, and they're not making people feel better. We want a relationship in our work. We want to have a collaboration where we all move forward, hopefully in a way that helps us become a little safer, hopefully in a way that helps us all learn from the work, from each other. And we're seeing a hunger for that. And so, you know, HOP is a label, and under it there are many things. Ivan and I actually teach a lot of things that aren't in the original HOP. We expand it out into this culture perspective, for example. And as soon as you start to look at that differently, your life can change. And so I'm gonna share a coin here, and I'm going to describe the coin for those that are listening through audio. So on one side, it's a challenge coin. Whoopsies, here we are. And this is from the language course I developed for our program. The first language course that happened, they actually created this coin. So that was fantastic. So on this side, we have a black and white image. We have a black tree with no leaves. It's just dead. And in front of it is this barrier, like, with the crosshatches on it and such. And on the ends are these A's that are holding it up. Those A's are agentive language. In the middle is a big B. That's like blame. So this black and white, cold, dead tree image with blame and agentive language, that's what we're trying to move away from. And then on the other side, we have a colorful image. We have this beautiful green hill, and there's this yellow path going off in the distance, and it never ends. It just keeps going. On the bottom is the word learning. And there are two hands, human hands, holding an emerging plant or tree is starting to grow. Above that, it says the word how with a question mark. The question mark's the important part. Not just how, but any question. And at the top is the word understanding. So on this side, we're saying there's this path of learning in front of all of us. It's never going to end. We need to be pulled forward with that path through the questions we ask, through the desire to learn all that we can together in this relationship with each other as people, valuing people. And through that, maybe we'll achieve some kind of understanding in this dynamic world and reframe things that we thought were just truths.
If you could go back in time to the beginning of your career focus on the shift into accident investigation or away from pure language and more into occupational safety, what's one piece of advice that you might give yourself at the beginning of that journey for you?
Probably that even when it doesn't seem like anyone else is doing what you're doing or considering things the way you're considering them, it's okay. That shift may just not have happened yet, and you're not crazy, and you should feel free to experiment and even have those little uh, failures along the way or things that weren't yeah, air quotes right there. What seemed like failures at the time may not be, it may be your growth. And so it's a hard road, but like this path on the coin, it's never ending, and you can always reframe. And the the relationships and community you develop out of this is amazing. And that is going to be the biggest part, is that you can help others transform, and in the process transform yourself.
How can our listeners learn more about some of the topics in the discussion today? You did mention a few books, but are there particular books or websites, organizations that you think are worth checking out?
Sure. So our book, I'm holding up our book right now, but anybody can get this on Amazon. It's Human and Organization Potential. And it's not, as Todd said, it's not a scary book. Todd Conklin. It's not a scary book. Um, we wrote this from the perspective of being academics with academic pinning. So there's a lot of people we stand on the shoulders of with this book. But we wrote it in a way that anyone can read it and apply it not just to a safety role, any role. I mean, we've had all kinds of people that have nothing to do with safety read this book and say, wow, I got a lot out of that. I really learned something. So we encourage that, and it's available on Amazon. And then we will give you links to my thesis has a lot of content in it on language bias and accident investigation guide. A lot of content around this agentive language and binary opposition and labels and such that we talked about today in a little more depth. There you mentioned another article. Unfortunately, that article it's pretty limited to academics that have access to academic libraries, and I hate that. I really do. I want open access to things. And that's why I thought my thesis might be better for that. And then the other thing I would give a link to is our program at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. It's in the Advanced Safety and Engineering program, and it's a master's degree that has different tracks you can take, or we call them pathways right now. You can take a traditional pathway if that's of interest to you, and we're not saying that's bad. Traditional, not bad, but that satisfies a lot of people in their roles, what they need to do. You can also take the pathway for HOP, which Ivan and I teach together, and you take our courses, which would be crisis leadership. And I told you it's mind blowing where we go with that. It's not just about crisis, it's about relationships and communication. And then my language and communication class. And then I have a semiotics class, which semiotics are the signs and symbols we use to communicate everything with each other and create meaning. So that even goes deeper. It's another perspective. And then Ivan has our learning review course and also an HOP course. And so within the program, you do those 5 courses as well. And then you come out with that great knowledge. And it's something that a lot of people want to pursue. They don't know how to do it. You get an academic degree as well as lots of dialogue. That's what we do, dialogic classes. And And we learn from our students like they learn from us. In fact, I'll mention an interesting term from the Maori, New Zealand native population. Ako. Ako is a story. It's a teacher and the students go into a building. When they emerge, you cannot tell the teacher from the students. That's our goal. So through the spirit of Ako, we try to share and learn and create this as this wonderful dynamic journey that we can all take together. And who knows where it will lead us.
And if our listeners want to reach out to you directly, there's through those programs, does LinkedIn work
LinkedIn
as
is
well?
a great way to link up with me. And Mary, if you would put my LinkedIn, and you probably have Ivan's, and
Yep,
Ivan's there
absolutely,
too.
we
Yeah,
will.
that'd be great.
Well, that's the end of today's discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
And thank you
Crista.
so much for this great opportunity. Look forward to hearing from other people as well.
Listeners, did you enjoy this episode? Are you excited to hear more references to Gershwin songs in the context of workplace safety? If the answer is yes, please give us a review wherever you listen to or watch this podcast and share it with a colleague. Thanks to the Safety Labs team for creating a show worth sharing. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.